This is part of a longer series in wisdom literature that, will probably take another year or so. And so we talked about the four major intellectual traditions in ancient Israel. And so, pop quiz, what are they? Good. So we've got the prophetic, the priestly, the royal, and the wisdom tradition. And one of the things maybe we said, maybe we didn't say, is that toward the end of the Old Testament period, these all kind of merge together, even though they've always been somewhat interconnected, because when you have 5% of Israel who can read and write, they're all mainly going to be located in the city, the cities and, Jerusalem. Therefore, they're going to be connected with the temple and the palace. And it's just not a big society. And so it's a very small pond. And so, of course, these traditions are going to overlap with one another. But towards the end of the Old Testament period, what Christians have wrongly called the 400 silent years. It's there's nothing silent about those years at all. Actually, it's in fact probably the busiest time for Jewish writing in the entire Old Testament period. You have those four traditions coming together into what we call apocalyptic, and so the only full-fledged apocalypse in the Old Testament is the book of Daniel. And when you go through Daniel, and I think we did a little bit 1 week maybe, right, where you can very quickly trace all four of these elements and how they've come together into this very new thing. And when you go into the New Testament, you see that carries over, because Jesus, especially in the book of Hebrews, right, Hebrews is where the interconnectedness of all of these traditions is highlighted the most. So Jesus as a prophet, it begins, right off the bat, in these last days, God has spoken to us in his Son. And so that is a prophetic element there. Jesus as prophet of all prophets, as it were. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek, the book of Hebrews says. Well, it's obviously priestly. Jesus and his future kingdom, right, King of the Jews and so on. I mean, that's clearly a royal tradition. And so then there's the wisdom tradition, and, there is a book that I use from time to time in sermons called The Sage of Galilee, because Jesus is a wise teacher. He's using parables and wisdom sayings and things like that, all of which are right at home in books like Proverbs. And so in the person of Jesus, you also see the coalescence of these four traditions. And Jesus is an apocalyptic figure, right? When you think about it, because what is apocalypse all about? Revealing the veil, and then the common themes are, well, destruction. God's going to intervene in human history to fix what is wrong, right? He's finally going to act on behalf of his people. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and all that. And so when you look at Matthew 24, for instance, I had no intention of talking about any of this today, but it's the necessary context. So I'm just going to read through this really quickly. So Matthew 24, Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. And remember, Herod's temple, the upgrade of the second temple, right? The second temple in Haggai, I mean, it's nothing impressive whatsoever. But Herod comes along, and it's the temple on steroids now. It's just absolutely magnificent. And so Jesus' disciples, they're duly impressed, like, oh my word, look at the gold and it's just everything, the pomp and ceremony. And Jesus, as always, unimpressed, says, but he answered them, you see all these? Do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. Nobody wants to hear that. Right, and depending on what translation you're reading, you might see a subheading now called the sign of the end of the age. And so he sat on the Mount of Olives, and his disciples say privately, shh, just tell us, when will these things be, right? And probably in full voice, I imagine. This is, my imagination, but I can kind of see it. He's like, nah, I'm not going to hush about this. See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying I'm the Christ. And so this whole idea of a coming deliverer, you see this in Revelation, right? A false Messiah, that kind of thing, Antichrist, right? You'll hear of wars and rumors of wars, but the end is not yet, right? So great tribulation, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, famines, earthquakes. I mean, this sounds like the book of Revelation here in many ways, right? And then they'll deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, right? Think of Revelation, when, the slaughtered saints have say, when, O Lord, will you avenge our blood, right? It's all right here in Matthew 24. You'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake, and many will fall away. There'll be apostasy, and so on and so forth. Finally, the gospel of the kingdom, there's that royal tradition, will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to the nations. Then the end will come. But oh, wait a second. There's also this matter of the abomination of desolations, and it goes on and on and on and on. All of this, the early Christianity from its inception, the Jesus movement, as I prefer to call it, because it's not a new religion, it's not Christianity, it's just the Jewish Jesus movement initially, where Judaism is fulfilled in him, is very much a millenarian or apocalyptic movement right from the beginning. And so all that to say, what we're doing, this whole business of understanding the four major intellectual traditions in ancient Israel and how they coalesce into apocalyptic, that is the bedrock upon which Christian theology is based, right? And so when we miss the apocalyptic piece, we miss what the Jesus movement is all about, right? And so, and there's a practical side to this too. When you're talking to someone who is outside the faith or maybe has let's call it a more liberal view of Jesus, right? Or a more quote unquote contemporary view of Jesus, right? Jesus was a great teacher. True. But by understanding the four intellectual traditions upon which, the apocalyptic Jesus movement is based, you say, well, yeah, okay, he was a great teacher. In fact, we're going to see a text later today in Acts chapter 10 in Peter's sermon when the Holy Spirit is coming to the Gentiles now. He labels Jesus as a good teacher, all of which is true, the sage of Galilee. The only problem is that it's an incomplete view of Jesus. And so when we are able to kind of set up these different categories for the that contribute to the foundation of Christianity, we can have a conversation with someone, and say, you know what, Jesus was a good teacher. And there's actually a lot of interesting stuff about that. His parables, they're so fascinating, right? But you can then turn to some of his parables, like the parable of the kingdom, right? And you say, oh, wait a second, he's more than just a good teacher, he's presenting himself as a king. And so it becomes a segue into having a more robust conversation about Jesus. Instead of using it as a point of antagonism and argument, it's a springboard to have to bring light to the conversation. There's a strategy to it. I have a knack for doing 20-minute introductions to very short talks. Okay. So what were we talking about? Oh, yeah, the handout that I gave you. Right. Okay. So great book. The Jewish Annotated New Testament. It's just, it's the New Revised Standard Version, which Oxford University Press publishes. But all the notes in here and the essays in the back of this, which is one, are done by Jewish non-Christian scholars. They're not Messianic Jews. These are some of the best Jewish scholars in the world. But I like reading it because if you want to understand the Jewishness of the New Testament, you got to listen to Jews. What I thought we'd do today, and this is obviously just going to be the beginning of something that will probably need to extend for a few weeks, has to do with the Old Testament wisdom tradition and how it impacts our reading of John 1:1 and the prologue, which really extends through like verse 14, right? The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, right, etc. So today, I think what I will do, I don't want to, just sit here and read. I'm just going to talk about some of the issues that are in here. It would probably be good if you could take the time to read through this over the course of the week. Write down questions, because I imagine there are going to be things, names, whatever, that are foreign to you. And if you just come up with a list of things that just either went over your head or you've never heard of before, then I'll answer them next week, and then we'll continue on. But here are the the issues. So when we go to John chapter 1 and verse 1, let's see, let's bring that up. All right, and so in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay? In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so in order to interpret any New Testament text, we have to understand it in context. Okay? And with the New Testament, that is tricky business, really, with any passage, because, well, let's think about this out loud. This discussion is continued in next video. Please be sure to check it out.